The moment Dani decides to reveal the truth about the child she's carrying, everything explodes like a bomb placed right at the center of Andre's life. There's no warning, no time to prepare, just a single secret that's enough to shatter everything he's tried so hard to hide. The truth threatens not only his reputation, his relationships, and his future, but also sets off a chain of dark consequences that could drag everyone involved into a spiral of chaos with no way out. And the most chilling feeling is that Dani isn't just pregnant, she's holding something that could bring Andre's entire world crashing down in an instant. Andre felt the floor shift beneath him the moment Dani revealed the truth. The world he had meticulously arranged, every ambition, every secret, every fragile boundary, collapsed into a storm of panic that churned violently inside his chest. He stood frozen, breathing shallowly as if something cold and merciless had wrapped itself around his ribs. The weight of Dani's confession pressed on him with suffocating intensity, and for a moment he wished he could rewrite time, silence her words, or flee before reality could catch him. But reality had already dug its claws in, deeper than he could bear. Her presence, once a distraction he could control, now became a mirror reflecting everything he had tried to bury. Dani looked at him with a mixture of fear and determination, a wounded but unyielding resolve that forced Andre to confront the consequences of choices he had made half-heartedly, carelessly, impulsively. Inside him flickered a sudden fury, anger at himself, anger at her, anger at the universe for placing him in a position where desire had mutated into something irreversible. A child. Responsibility. Exposure. The unraveling of the careful life he had stitched together to seem untouchable. The rage rose not because he hated her, but because she had pierced through the armor he wore so tightly. The kind of vulnerability he feared most now stared at him with a pair of trembling eyes. Dani's announcement wasn't merely a personal shift, it was a threat to everything he built, his reputation, the delicate negotiations he was entangled in, the image of discipline he depended on to stay afloat within a world already thick with suspicion and envy. A child meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant leverage. And leverage in the wrong hands meant destruction. While he wrestled with his spiraling fear, Dani struggled with a storm of her own. Beneath her steady expression churned resentment, exhaustion, and a pain she had carried alone for too long. She had imagined dozens of possible reactions from Andre, but nothing prepared her for this suffocating silence, this distant fury flickering behind his eyes. She expected apologies, explanations, anything that resembled acknowledgement, but all she felt from him was an escalating tension, as if he were calculating the fallout rather than seeing her trembling under the weight of the truth. Dani had spent weeks wrestling with uncertainty. She recalled every moment she hesitated, every night she stared at the ceiling wondering if she should disappear before things became more complicated. But fear gave way to determination. She refused to be a hidden consequence of someone else's ambition. She refused to erase herself to preserve Andre's pristine world. If he would not make room for her, then she would carve a space by force, even if it meant shattering illusions, exposing lies, and tearing through the carefully guarded boundaries that protected him. As Andre stood between panic and fury, Dani's mind swirled with memories of how easily he had crossed lines with her. Every choice that led them to this point had been tinged with desire, recklessness, vulnerability disguised as passion. She remembered how Andre moved through his life with calculated control, always aware of what he could gain or lose, while she allowed herself to trust him, to believe the softness in moments he would now pretend never existed. Now that softness felt poisonous, like a trap she had set for herself without realizing it. Their emotions clashed violently, though neither spoke a single word. As Dani's pulse quickened with both anger and heartbreak, Andre felt his own resentment deepen. He resented the way she watched him, waiting for him to take responsibility, waiting for him to step into a role he had never imagined occupying. He resented how cornered he felt, how powerless. And underneath that resentment lurked guilt, raw, burning guilt that he refused to name. Every unspoken fear inside him ignited a darker instinct, the need to protect himself, even if it meant pushing Dani away. He feared the exposure that a child could bring. Whispers. Questions. The unraveling of alliances he could not afford to compromise. Andrei knew too well the ruthless world he moved in. It was a place where enemies disguised themselves as confidants, where secrets could be sold for influence, where vulnerabilities were currency. If the truth spread, he would be devoured by people who had waited years for even the smallest crack in his armor. Dani, however, understood more than he realized. She had witnessed how he maneuvered around danger, how he cultivated the illusion of control to shield himself. But she also knew he relied on that illusion too heavily, allowing it to replace genuine connection. His obsession with survival blinded him to the destruction he left in his wake. Dani refused to disappear quietly. She refused to carry the burden of this pregnancy as if it were a stain. If Andrei wouldn't stand beside her, she would stand alone, but she would not be silent. In the days that followed, tension wrapped itself around them like razor wire. Andrei withdrew into himself, seething quietly, spiraling through a labyrinth of doubt and strategy. He analyzed every possible outcome. The political fallout, the professional consequences, the familial implications, the potential betrayals, the inevitable judgment. He felt hunted by consequences he had never considered until now. Dani's internal landscape was just as turbulent. She balanced between fear and defiance, imagining futures that shifted like sand depending on Andrei's next move. She caught glimpses of him pacing rooms alone, gripping his own hands until the knuckles whitened, battling invisible enemies in his mind. Despite her anger, she felt a tug of empathy, brief, painful moments where she saw the version of him he tried to hide, a version cracked open by desperation rather than malice. But empathy could not erase the bitterness crawling beneath her skin. She felt betrayed, not just by Andrei's reaction, but by her own naive hope that he would be someone she could trust when everything became unbearably real. The longer he remained silent, the more she felt something inside her harden, turning resolve into armor. Rumors began to circulate around them, not about the pregnancy, but about Andrei's unusual behavior. People noticed the way his temper flared unpredictably, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he seemed distracted even in critical moments. Dani felt the ripple effects too, sensing eyes lingering on her longer than usual, whispers dying abruptly whenever she entered a room. The air around them thickened, threatening to drag their secret into the open. Andrei felt the pressure mounting, and with it came a growing paranoia. Every glance from a colleague felt like an accusation. Every question sounded like a trap. His relationships, already precarious, started to fray under the strain. The guilt he carried twisted into a destructive force, feeding the darker impulses he tried to contain. He blamed Dani for pushing him into this chaos, even though part of him knew the truth. He had built this disaster with his own hands. Dani, seeing him unravel, realized how deeply his fear consumed him. She had hoped he would eventually step forward, face the situation with maturity, but instead he recoiled further into denial. The betrayal cut deeper each day. She began questioning every moment they had shared, wondering how much had been real and how much had been a carefully curated illusion. Yet even as she tried to detach emotionally, she felt the weight of the child inside her, a reminder that no matter how fractured things became, they were linked by something irreversible. As the emotional distance between them expanded, their private worlds grew darker. Andrei grew harsher, less patient, prone to impulsive decisions that strained his relationships with those around him. Dani grew colder, more calculated, her pain sharpening her instincts. Neither wanted war, but both felt themselves being dragged toward it, pushed by resentment, fear, and the unavoidable collision of two people who no longer recognized each other. The breaking point came quietly, without an explosion, without confrontation. It came in the form of realization. Each recognizing that the other had become a threat. Andrei feared exposure more than anything, and Dani feared abandonment with equal intensity. Their conflicting instincts pulled them toward a dangerous path, one where survival overshadowed trust, and resentment overshadowed whatever affection once existed. Andrei found himself imagining escape, cutting ties, disappearing into a world where consequences couldn't reach him. But no matter how far he imagined running, Dani's shadow followed him, carrying the truth he could never outrun. Dani, meanwhile, imagined a future where she had to protect herself and her child not from scandal, but from the emotional devastation Andre's denial could inflict. She steeled herself, preparing for battle if necessary. They had become enemies forged not by hatred, but by unspoken pain. Their mutual anger fed on silence, turning vulnerability into conflict, and conflict into a wound that refused to heal. And as they stood at the edge of their unraveling, one terrifying truth became clear: neither could return to who they had been before. Everything had shifted. Every choice carried weight. Every hesitation risked catastrophe. The storm between them had only begun.